Welcome to Hardly, where books turn into three stories, refreshing your knowledge in minutes. Today we listen to Keith Boykin's book, Why Does Everything Have to Be About Race? 25 arguments that won't go away, in which we probe into the persistent struggle against systemic racism and the ongoing deflection of white supremacy in American society. Keith Boykin is a New York Times best-selling author, TV and film producer, and former CNN political commentator. Don't go away. Hardly, the editor, will be right back with the story. Today, let me share with you three stories that illustrate the tenacity of systemic racism in the U.S. and the insidious ways white supremacy is deflected. We'll explore the manipulation of Black identity, the weaponization of education, and the distortion of historical truths. Story 1. The Illusion of Progress. Imagine it's the night of November 4th, 2008. The world is watching as America makes history by electing its first Black president. The streets are alive with hope, and many believe this moment marks the end of racism in the country. But, as history would soon reveal, this victory was a double-edged sword. Barack Obama's election was monumental, no doubt, but beneath the surface, it was also used as a tool by many to claim that America had entered a post-racial era, an idea that conveniently ignored the deep-seated issues that continued to plague Black communities. In reality, Obama's presidency became a facade for the unchanging systemic racism. For instance, even as he led the country, Black Americans were disproportionately affected by the Great Recession, with the wealth gap between Black and white households widening further. The long-term racial disparities in employment, healthcare, education, housing, household wealth, criminal justice, and even access to safe drinking water all existed before he took office, and all remained when he left, the book reminds us. This story isn't just about one man's rise to power. It's about how his success was co-opted as evidence that systemic racism was over, even as the very structures of that racism remained untouched. For many, Obama's presidency was a symbol of hope, but for others, it was an excuse to ignore the real work that still needed to be done. Story 2. The Classroom Battlefield. Our next story takes us to a high school classroom in Florida. Picture this. A group of students is eagerly discussing history, delving into the complex layers of America's past. But suddenly, the teacher hesitates, unsure of how to proceed. Why? Because the curriculum has been altered and certain topics are now off-limits. In recent years, critical race theory, CRT, has become a battleground. Republican lawmakers have positioned it as a threat, claiming it teaches students to hate America. But what they don't say is that CRT is a framework that simply seeks to understand how racism is embedded in legal systems and policies. CRT was never about hating America. It was about examining the role of race in law and society, the book points out. This story highlights the chilling effect of political interference in education. By targeting CRT, lawmakers are not only misrepresenting it but also actively working to suppress important conversations about race and justice. In Florida, textbooks were even altered to omit any mention of Rosa Parks' race, reducing her brave act of defiance to a mere footnote. This isn't just about one theory. It's about the broader effort to whitewash history and deny students a full understanding of the country's past. Story 3. The Revision of History. Finally, let's journey back to the early 20th century. Imagine the bustling streets of Tulsa, Oklahoma, where a thriving Black community known as Black Wall Street is flourishing. Businesses are booming, families are thriving, and a sense of pride fills the air. But in 1921, all of that is violently torn apart as white mobs descend on the community, burning homes and businesses and killing hundreds of black residents. For decades, the Tulsa Race Massacre was erased from history books, a deliberate act of forgetting that served to maintain the narrative of white supremacy. It wasn't until recently that this horrific event began to receive the attention it deserved, revealing how deeply the scars of racism run in America. The book describes how the silence surrounding Tulsa was part of a broader pattern of erasing black history, a tactic used to prevent the country from confronting its past and the systemic racism that continues to this day. This story is a stark reminder of the power of historical narratives. By controlling what is remembered and what is forgotten, those in power shape the identity of a nation. The revision of history isn't just about the past. It's about controlling the present and future, ensuring that certain truths remain buried while others are elevated. These stories reveal the multifaceted nature of systemic racism and the many ways it persists, often under the guise of progress or through the manipulation of education and history. The idea that one election, one law, or one event could undo centuries of oppression is not only naive, but dangerous. It allows the structures of white supremacy to remain intact while giving the illusion of change. The real challenge lies in confronting these truths head-on, in refusing to accept superficial victories as signs of true progress. It's about recognizing that the fight against racism is ongoing and that it requires continuous effort, education, and most importantly, honesty about our past and present. As the editor of Hardly, by understanding these stories, we can push for a future where education is honest, history is complete, and progress is more than just symbolic. 25 arguments that won't go away. 1. Barack Obama's election does not compensate for hundreds of years of racism. 2. Critical race theory is not indoctrinating school kids to be woke. 3. Dr. King didn't say America should be colorblind. 4. Republicans are no longer the party of Lincoln. 5. The Civil War was about slavery, not states' rights. 6. Affirmative action is not reverse discrimination. 7. Even the poorest white people have white privilege. 8. Yes, European immigrants struggled, but they were not slaves. 9. White Americans still benefit from the legacy of slavery. 10. Being called a Karen is not comparable to being called the N-word. 11. Complying with the police does not protect us. 12. No, we're not going back to Africa. 13. Black people don't have to prove our patriotism. 14. We will never reach equality without reparations. 15. There are more white people than black people on welfare. 16. Black-on-black crime is an outdated media trope. 17. Black families are not broken. 18. Black cities struggle because of decisions by white policymakers. 19. There is no race card. 20. Black friends do not immunize people from racism. 21. People who say they don't have a racist bone in their body haven't searched hard enough. 22. Yes, you do see color, and there's nothing wrong with that. 23. All lives matter is a cheap excuse to avoid saying Black Lives Matter. 24. Yes, everything is about race. 25. Racism is not just individual acts, it's systemic. The key argument that systemic racism persists and white supremacy is often deflected in American society remains as relevant as ever. Throughout our exploration, we've seen how superficial progress can mask deeper, unresolved issues. To close, let me share one more story that illustrates this point. In the 1960s, Malcolm X visited Africa and was struck by the solidarity he found among African nations in their fight against colonialism. He returned to the U.S. with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to connect the struggles of African Americans with those of oppressed people worldwide. However, upon his return, Malcolm faced not only the resistance of white America, but also the growing divisions within the Black community, fueled by years of systemic oppression and strategic efforts to weaken their collective power. His assassination in 1965 is a tragic reminder that those who challenge the status quo often face the harshest consequences. This story underscores the dangers that come with defying systemic power structures. It highlights how the fight against racism is not just about changing laws, but also about challenging deeply ingrained social systems that resist change at every turn. As the editor of Hardly, by learning these lessons, we can better equip ourselves to push for meaningful, lasting change in our society, where the fight against racism is recognized as a collective struggle, not just an individual one.